Well, hello again from my holy cell here in southern England. We believe in the gospel of the kingdom of Jesus Christ, and it says in Romans chapter 10 verse 10, and I read from the Keys of the Kingdom Holy Bible, Romans chapter 10 verse 10, "For with the heart it is believed into righteousness, and with the mouth profession is made into salvation. For the scroll says everybody who believes in him will not be put to shame." For righteousness and salvation and not being put to shame, you have to believe in your heart and confess with your mouth. Amen. Praise Yahweh Elohim. Who wrote the letter to Hebrews, and why is it so important? All the letters of the New Covenant writings open with an address from the author, except 1 John that doesn't, but it's plainly from John, and in 2 John and 3 John he addresses himself as the elder man. Paul in Romans addresses himself as Paul, the servant of Jesus Christ, but in the letter to the Hebrews we find no such authorial introduction, and people have wondered why. Some have suggested that perhaps the writer didn't want the recipients to know. I'm a bit sceptical about that. I'm more of the view that they would have known most definitely, but that's only my opinion. But to decide who wrote the letter to the Hebrews, we need to look at some evidence around the letter and some internal evidence. So first I'm going to 1 Peter, and 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 1, Peter addresses his letter to the elect exiles of the dispersion, so the scattered tribes. It's not addressed to everybody, is it? The elect exiles of the dispersion. And in his second letter, he says in chapter 3, verse 1, "This second letter I now write to you." So this obviously also is written to the scattered tribes, the elect exiles of the dispersion. Otherwise, he wouldn't call it his second letter, and he wouldn't say, "I write to you." And in Peter's second letter, he makes this statement that Paul also, with the wisdom given to him, wrote to you. 2 Peter 3:15. So Peter is writing to the scattered tribes, and he says, Paul wrote to you. Paul wrote to the scattered tribes, the dispersion, Hebrews, Israelites. Peter, in fact, continues, Paul also, with the wisdom given to him, wrote to you, as also in all his letters, suggesting all his letters, along with those of Peter, were to the elect exiles of the dispersion. Otherwise, why did Peter say it? That's the first evidence around Hebrews. 2. When the books of the New Covenant writings are put in the correct order, not in the order assembled in our Bibles, and I confess, not even in Keys of the Kingdom, I held back on it because I thought I was presenting readers with so much that is new that I stuck to the conventional order, and in the next edition they will be assembled in the divine order, and I call it a divine order because when they are constructed in the order that initially circulated of the New Testament writings, it was not what we have now. And put together with the books of the Old Covenant writings in the correct order, there is an astonishing mathematical divine signature. And if anybody wants to see that, You can see it in my chart on my website. The link to that is in the description. And it's at the end of appendix number 2. So scroll around the website and you'll find it at the end of appendix 2, a chart showing the extraordinary divine arrangement of the books in the right order. Now, when the books are put in that order, in the ways they were originally circulated, Paul's letters were assembled in this way. First to the groups, then Hebrews, and then to individuals. So groups, Hebrews, individuals. So Hebrews comes about 2/3 of the way. So it's, how does it go? Romans, Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Thessalonians, Hebrews, then to individuals, Timothy, Titus and Philemon. So that suggests authorship by Paul of the letter to the Hebrews. 3. There is also internal evidence in Hebrews. It concludes with Paul's usual sign-off in all his letters. Grace be with you all. Amen. All Paul's letters conclude with such a blessing. 4. The depth and intensity of the Hebrews letter, I suggest, is that of the mind of the Apostle Paul, such as in his letter to the Romans, particularly in the early chapters. It's very intense and deep, and he cites a lot of old prophets, as does Hebrews. And what's the other one I noted? Ephesians, the first 2 chapters of Ephesians. Those are intense and deep. And the brilliant commentator Otis Q. Sellers, he died, I think, early 1990s, American. He wrote in one of his studies he didn't fully understand Ephesians, which prompted me to study it deeply. 5. Hebrews 10:34 says, you indeed sympathized with my shackles. Oh, was Paul not confessing in his other letters that he was a prisoner and in shackles, chains? 6. Hebrews 5:11 says of Melchizedek, concerning whom we have much discourse, difficult to be explained. Difficult to be explained. That is in harmony with Peter's saying of Paul's letters, there are some things hard to be understood. 2 Peter 3:16. Nothing else in the New Testament is spoken of in that way, hard to be understood, although it might well be said of revelation of the signs and symbols. 7. The Greek text of Scrivener, Berry, Bagster and Green have the heading to Hebrews, the letter of the Apostle Paul to the Hebrews. They took the writer to be Paul, and they must have had very good reasons. And Dr. E.W. Bullinger, who edited the Companion Bible, actually the book that woke me up, mid-90s, 1995, I got hold of that after reading his How to Enjoy the Bible. And in the Companion Bible, there are many margin notes on every page, and I read the lot, and 197 appendices. I devoured it in the summer of 1995, and that worked me up to translation issues. He believed, and writes on page 1823 of the Companion Bible, that he believed that Paul was the author of Hebrews. So those are the evidences I present to you to consider, but best of all, I think, is that from Peter saying, Paul also wrote to you, as in also all his letters, when Peter's letters are addressed to nobody but the elect exiles on the dispersion. So Paul was writing to the dispersion, Peter's comment tells us. So Paul wrote Hebrews and wrote to the dispersion. And why is that so important? Well, it's not very assuring and comforting to the traditional teachings about the Apostle Paul, is it? And Paul, an apostle to the scattered tribes, Paul, an apostle to the Israelites, Paul, an apostle to the Hebrews. Thank you for listening.